Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. David, great to see you.
Too.
And we've both been so incredibly busy doing things, and we've got that constant commitment to do more of these recordings. So this is the first of a new wave of commentary I think we're going to shift to, which is, it's not that we still won't do the bigger topics, but I think to keep us activated on things that are real and happening in the world. So looking forward to doing that. And let's start off. I think we've agreed on what's real and what's happening right now. And the Tory leadership, call it battle or whatever, contest or whatever we want to call it, is happening right now. So we okay to have that one as our our topic today?
I think it would be hard to resist. And I was reading the paper just the other day, in fact 2 days ago, that Boris Johnson was credited with having brought down 3 governments, the 3 being Cameron's, Theresa May's, and his own, and all I think on the matter of trust. He's, in a sense, it looks as if he's really massively shot himself in the foot, because people have completely lost trust in his ability to lead in a coherent and in a coherent manner, but also with demonstrable integrity. And it seems to me that there is a kind of a crying out in the country for people to tell the truth and lead with integrity. That's my sense of it. What's yours?
Yeah, I really hear that. And when we look at things like the Edelman Trust Barometer, there's this constant lack of decreasing trust in the world on, in all aspects. And I'm not necessarily believing that people are less trustworthy. I just think with social media, we're just more alert to the reality of probably what's always been true. And then, of course, you get somebody, and it's easy to look at people from a distance and look at what you're reading in the news. But I think Boris's big shortfall maybe is that he seems to have, and we don't want to get into assassination on characters, but he is there and he is a focus point. He seems to have a very loose kind of connection, I would say, with the truth, but I know he knows what the truth is. So he's either, or does he? But he seems to believe almost that it doesn't apply, or if he bluffs and bravados, there's a news cycle, it'll go through. And actually, I can just I can move through it. So whether or not it's he's some form of sociopath who just doesn't fundamentally feel it, or he's intellectually calculated that what, if I just keep smiling and acting like a little bit of a buffoon, within 72 hours the news will have moved on and I'll still be in place.
I've never met the man, and so I'd hate to sort of assassinate his character by remote control, as it were. But I think I'd offer a couple of thoughts. I think, firstly, everyone says that he is enormously charismatic. And that's why he's such a kind of attractive character when people spend any time with him. He's got a great sense of humor. He can be utterly charming and so on. But I have to say that in the history of leadership, and as you know, I've spent a fair bit of time kind of researching that, the track record of charismatic leaders is not great. Because often what happens is that whatever skill set you have, there's a great tendency to overplay it. It's as if, if you like a golfer who's particularly good with one particular golf club, they use it, at times when another golf club would be better. And the charismatic leaders who reach for that particular club every time they've got any kind of tight situation, eventually the charm runs thin. And what people want is a bit more grasp of the detail, please. A bit more integrity, please. Please don't just tell us what we want to hear. Don't become a people pleaser. Take the tough decisions. These are the things that often the charismatic leaders struggle to do. One of the exceptions might well have been Bill Clinton, who reportedly was extremely bright and was able to kind of grasp his briefs, and incidentally with Gore as well, that the two of them were extremely capable at kind of grasping complex issues very firmly and understanding them. And often the civil servants who had been around for a while used to claim that they were like a breath of fresh air because of the intellect they brought to it all. I'm not saying that Johnson isn't bright. He clearly is, but I think he probably overplays, by my analysis, the charm card and doesn't really get to grips with the issues. And that's why he needs people around him, funnily enough, I think, like Gove, who is an arch-detailed focuser. And yet, the two of them have what is potentially a compatible difference, but they seem to have an incompatible personalities, and they don't trust each other. So that's a recipe for failure in the medium term, and that's what we've found. He got a huge mandate. What was it, 2 years ago, and now we're in the medium term, and guess what? It's all fallen apart.
I hear that, and I guess what I think about when I look at people like Boris is, and who was the French
Macron
Prime Minister? Previously with the black hair slicked back. Or is that the Italian one, Berlusconi?
Oh, Berlusconi, he's Italian, yeah.
Yeah, yes. People forgive individual behaviour. There's a huge scope for, if it's you just being you and it's not infecting anybody, it may not be ideal, but it's if the individual has a character flaw, but it's localized to them, then it's one of those things. We're all human. It's when it's seen to then not just affect but infect others, and the classic of, if you are going to say to everybody, stay at home during COVID, and you cannot even go and see your nan, or whatever that is, and yet you are possibly still playing safe, but actually you've got to be whiter than white. And I'm not even going to get into the intricacies of whether or not you had a party. Was the distancing quite right? Almost who knows, but it should be. I'm not going anywhere near a party. In fact, I cannot even be seen in the vicinity of another human being. Why? Because I'm asking everybody not to. So I don't even want the camera angle to be taken, that it could look like I'm closer than I should be. So there's just that, there might be the intellectual intelligence, the emotional intelligence for what's going on in the world, but then the situational sensing to go, actually, this is about perception, which might even outweigh truth.
Well, you make
those factors.
Yeah, you make a powerful point. The couple of thoughts come to mind. I think the first is that yes, people are remarkably tolerant of human foibles, but I think when that tolerance runs thin is under two circumstances. One is when the individual seems unaware of their foible, and even worse, when they deny its existence. And that, I think, people get tired of very, very quickly and intolerant of extremely quickly. I think the other thing is that whilst we don't demand perfection of our politicians, and certainly if we did demand that, we wouldn't have many politicians, but you do kind of expect them to have a respect for, the laws that they themselves create. And secondly, some sort of healthy respect for public opinion, because it's at the end of the day, every politician is only in power because the people of our country give them that power to wield. And I'm very conscious of, you may remember, I don't know if you're familiar with the name Billy Graham. He was an American evangelist.
Religious.
And he was a Baptist evangelist, and used to tour the world, preaching. But he was so mindful of his reputation and how, in the court of public opinion, he could be castigated for the most innocent of behaviors if he got the wrong side of the line. So that he had a rule that he would never travel in a car with a woman unless there was someone else there, unless that woman was his wife. In other words, he just said, it's not worth it. It's not worth my playing fast and loose with people's perceptions when I stand for a very kind of strict approach to relationships and so on. Now, that might be regarded as extreme, and certainly, I'm sure you and I
don't think it is.
No, but all he was saying is, look, my reputation is part of my effectiveness. If my reputation gets jeopardized, my effectiveness as an evangelist drops through the floor. Now, if with that thinking, Boris would have stayed right away from those parties, not because it's dangerous and people are going to get COVID, but simply because in the court of public opinion, you've got to be clearly aware of and respectful of the rules that you're imposing on everybody else.
And I think this is important. The IQ, I'm smart enough to make a decision and know what's going on. EQ, I'm smart enough to know what's going on for you. And all of this situational intelligence, which is, I'm aware that the situation may require more than the intelligence that went into the thinking and the emotional intelligence to see what's going on. I may have to show and demonstrate and overtly demonstrate things that, because there are those in the world that will willfully disconnect. They are willfully trying to distort. So if I don't travel or I only travel in this way, that cannot be interpreted, may not be a word, interpreted, in such a way. But also, it's not open to misinterpretation. It's not open to any distortion. And I think that's something that even if you don't necessarily, if you miss the point on the IQ bit, because you didn't quite understand it, or you missed the point on the EQ bit, you didn't quite sense something. If your situational sensing's high, then actually if somebody says to you, have you actually understood this? And you actually suddenly realize, oh, no, I didn't. But the situation calls for honesty. And your ability to go, do you know what? No, I didn't. Well, do you think you should have understood it? Yes. Well, somebody in your role should definitely understand. I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, I think the public forgive. I think they go, oh, fair enough.
I think that's right. But I also sort of take Margaret Heffernan's point about willful blindness. The casting of a blind eye to a set of circumstances is all too easy, and particularly so when you believe that it's in private and you can get away with it. But the real respect for those rules, if you really believed in the rules that you impose on everybody else, then you would want to stick to them, not just, try to get away with it.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point you've got there, that it's not a hard thing to do when you believe in
exactly
it. In fact,
so.
It's instinctual.
And if you don't believe in it, then don't impose it on everybody else.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? And you know what? Even if you actually turned around and said, "Listen, we're bringing in these rules," I've got to be honest with you, I don't like them.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna struggle with them. So, I'm gonna really have to watch myself. Actually, if you'd have said that at the start of the whole process, again, rather than take a place of almost kind of theatrical kind of, ordainship, I will sit here on the mount and cast out my ideals. But actually, if you go, this is going to be hard for everybody, and no more so for me. I'm very gregarious. I instinctively want to be with people. Yeah. So I'm bound to mess this up a little bit as well. But can we all just try?
Yep. Yep. No, that's right. I identify with that feature of Johnson. I have a daughter and who's like this, and I'm a bit like it myself. I've often described my daughter Emily as a party just waiting to happen, and bless her heart, she's absolutely great fun. But you can't afford to do that if you've put restrictions on everybody else. I'm very mindful of the fact that I stick to the speed limits when I know that they make sense, and I really struggle. In fact, often don't when I think that there's no sense in this speed limit on this road at this time. Now, I know that makes road safety campaigners would be horrified at that thought, but I suspect a lot of people are like that. That if you can see that the traffic conditions don't warrant going quickly, then you don't. But if it doesn't look like that's sensible, then the chances are, I suspect most people do actually break the law.
Yeah, 2:00 in the morning going down the motorway and there's a 30-mile-an-hour limit on it, and you're thinking, I'm the only bugger on the motorway. There's a part of your brain that goes, I'm an adult and I can do these things. And I suppose, in the roles that we inhabit, which is that of leadership and working with individuals and teams, there's a message here that says, I guess, you can't consistently be at fault because that's a pattern, and there has to be a trust in competency. But if you are good enough to be in the game, then it wouldn't be unfair to say you're going to get it right 70 to 80% of the time, and 20-30% of the time, you're going to make an error. Yeah. Fine. Yeah. But if you come at it from a position of ownership, then actually, as long as that ownership doesn't turn into a habit, make a mistake, just say, I'm sorry. Hold on. People go, hold on. There's a pattern here of lack of competence.
I think that's right.
Then I think people can let you go a long way because they have a sense of the humanity of it. And I think that's one of the big lessons for leaders. You can make the big statements. You can make the power play for, I think we should really stretch. I think we should really go for it, or I think we need to be very clear about diversity. And but if somebody says, but you know what, I grew up in a generation where this wasn't really real for me. I've had an awakening on it. I get it, but my language may not be quite right versus saying, right, we all have to talk like this now and woe betide you if you don't.
Indeed.
Because the reality is,
I know that's
you're not going to be perfect yourself.
That's right. But you put me in mind of a number of points. I mean, the first is that leadership in normal times and leadership in a crisis are broadly similar, but in a crisis, you expect there to be a few exceptions. And I think that in the particular crisis that was COVID, where early on, particularly, we didn't know if it was just going to kind of wipe out big swathes of the population. And it did do that for certain age groups and vulnerable groups. So clearly, the watchword was stay away from everybody. It's the only thing right now that we know to do. Well, in a crisis, everybody has to do that because, in a sense, unless you've got a high level of herd immunity, even when a subsection of the population only are mixing with other people, you're passing around the virus, you're giving it opportunities to replicate, and with replication comes mutation, which comes, and with mutation comes the ability to escape whatever progress we're able to make in kind of managing it or even in vaccinating people against it. So all of that is, the red light should be warning. These are exceptional times. So even if, you're minded to play a little bit fast and loose with a few rules, for goodness sakes, don't do it in a crisis, because we need absolutely every human being on the planet to stick to those rules. These are exceptional times. And I think that notion of them being exceptional times was something that we needed to see our politicians demonstrating. But the second thing it puts me in mind of is I do take my hat off actually to Keir Starmer, who said, if the police think I've broken these rules, I'm off. That's it. I'm done. Why? Because my reputation matters. And even though he's leader of the opposition rather than prime minister, I do believe he made a principled stand, as did his deputy, Angela Rayner, and I take my hat off to them for having, made that commitment before they knew what the Durham Police's opinion was.
Yes. So I'm just looking something up on that. That willingness to recognise that when you've made an error. And I think when you talk in absolutes, that's when you do set yourself up for then, if you're not perfect, then you then have to live by your absolute. we absolutely cannot, and then you accidentally do, you don't give yourself a lot of room.
No, that's true.
Which is very different to, listen, we absolutely need to give it all of our energy, but we just have to bear in mind and recognise that we are all human beings. And along the way, we're probably not going to be perfect at this. And I think that's important, because then when the expected within a 12-month period, somebody points out that you think, oh God, I've absolutely messed that up, haven't I? Where do you go when you've spoken in absolutes?
Yeah. But
or held yourself up as the perfect form of it,
Well, or I'm wondering if you do that, though. I mean, take Starmer as a good example. He took a principled stand. He said, if the police consider that I've broken the law and they're going to issue me with a penalty notice, then I need to go. Now, I'm not sure that's making himself a hostage to fortune. I think it's firstly probably backed by his belief that he really hadn't broken the rules, really hadn't.
So I'm saying this with a level of confidence.
And secondly, that if I have, in the perception of the police, and I really have to look after their perception in the eyes of the electorate as well. The police, matter in a country like ours with the rule of law and so on. Then I've got to look after them as well. So I think that is a principled stand. But the other thing I'd say, and I think you've made this point as well. On the one hand, you've talked, and I think we need to tease these things apart. On the one hand, you've talked about tolerance, and I absolutely hear that and understand that we need to practice and, in a sense, depend upon people's ability to be tolerant of human foibles. But at the same time, you've mentioned that if you keep on doing the same thing, and each time your defence is, oh, whoops, sorry, did it again. I'm terrible, aren't I? Then at some point that runs very, very thin. And I'm thinking in the extreme cases, which are the real tragic cases. Think of the alcoholic. Think of the wife beater. Almost invariably, a man beats his wife and then apologizes and cries and said, "Oh, I'm terrible," and lo and behold, a couple more drinks, on the next Saturday night, and the whole thing happens again. At some point, you've got to say, "I'm sorry, this isn't a human foible. This is the kind of weakness that we absolutely are not prepared to tolerate."
And I think this comes into play when you're looking at managing performance. It's, all the goodwill in the world you might be in terms of, what you are, your commitment, your effort, they may all be exactly where they need to be. But there has to come a point of competence and there has to come a point of output. Yeah. So actually, well done for trying, well done for training, well done for receiving the feedback. I mean, I can tick everything. But actually, when we get to a point of repetition, and we can't break that cycle. There's a great phrase, which is your actions make a liar of you. And you may, with every good intent promised, you may with every good intent meant to, but you couldn't or you didn't. Yep. I can forgive the first, I can train on the second, I can give feedback on the third, but there comes a point where I have to go, hold on.
Yeah.
This is now not just a habit, it's a pattern. Yeah. And it's not breaking. So that's I think your point. Tolerance is a great thing up until the point. But I think that's about having defined lines. And I was just talking to a client about this the other day, where they have an incredibly, positive culture. And the phrase I came out with it is, what you tolerate can become a tolerance.
Yep.
And that means you have to have a line that says, regardless of who you are, once that line is reached, anything that happens after that is probably in the deficit.
We've talked about under what conditions are we prepared to trust people. We've talked about competence as the first criterion there. Competence, care, for me, as you know, competence, care, consistency, and courage are the sort of four indicators that I'm prepared to trust people. But let me offer a different sort of rule of thumb. Sometimes I'm asked, why do people fail? It sounds like the reasons could be legion. I don't think they are. I think they're probably only 5. That is, if it's a factor to do with them rather than the situation. But what are the internal reasons why people fail? I think it comes down to 5 things. I think the first is capacity. So if it's a tightrope walker with vertigo, the chances are they haven't got the capacity to be able to walk the tightrope. Or secondly, think of an example of a non-numerate guy who's trying to hold down a job as an actuary.
Yep.
They haven't got the capacity. But the second is learning. That people fail if they haven't learned the right things. That's the right knowledge, skills, or experience. They haven't got the things that would teach them how to succeed. They haven't gone down that road. The third is arousal. Technically, it means simply motivation. You can be over motivated and stressed by it, or under motivated and sort of too laid back to be at all kind of useful. And in either circumstance, you fail. The fourth is distraction. There's a problem somewhere else, So, if you've got a sick kid at home, or financial difficulties, or your marriage is breaking up, or whatever, you're distracted from the ability to focus on the job in hand. And the fifth is alienation. That is that if you feel so browned off with the way an organisation's treated you, you can be passive aggressive right the way through to downright, a saboteur. And I think those are the 5 reasons: capacity, learning, arousal, distraction, alienation. And I think that the most optimistic of all the diagnoses about why someone's screwing up is learning. Oh, well, if we can just give them the right knowledge, if we can send them on the right training course, if we can give them the right job rotations to build the experience, it'll all be okay. But if you come to the conclusion that it's a capacity issue, then they have to go. So that that sort of slightly comical aphorism is, the first thing you try to do with someone who's failing is help them out. But when you come to a capacity diagnosis, you have to help them out.
Yeah,
they have to go.
And I like that a lot. And I also then think as a counter weight to that, or maybe the yin to the yang, or whatever that is this idea of characteristics that says the things that you've listed there: capacity and learning and motivation, distraction, alienation. That really speaks to me almost of the individual's scope to operate in a place, in a space. And then there's something about all of those things could be A+ in some respects, but then we've got characteristics, personality traits in essence, I guess. And the biggest one for me is integrity. And that's a very interesting balance, I think, when you're very driven, you're very focused, you have an eye on the prize, and it can push people into making decisions that seem, inverted commas, strategic, which can be, but also can be slightly Machiavellian, because it's the politically savvy thing to do, to wait or to bide your time, or just to let's see how this horse runs, or whatever it is, and we end up not taking issue with things. And I was just looking at the Rishi Sunak, and I've just pulled something up, and it said Chancellor registered his leadership website domain name in December, 4 days after Boris Johnson's wine and cheese party photo was published. So records on domain tools show that his website, readyforrishi.com, was registered on December the 23rd, 2021. So that preemptive, right, I can see where this ball's rolling. So I'm just going to prepare myself. Yeah. Now, that might sound rather Machiavellian, but that's like saying, okay, I don't like working here anymore. I'm going to start looking for another job. Now, you could start looking for another job, completely disconnect from the organisation you're in and let it and stop. Or you could say, no, I'm going to continue doing as good a job as I'm capable of doing, but this now isn't right for me. So I don't necessarily have an issue with him doing it. But actually, you can see people love it, don't they? Oh, well, he was already out. He's obviously planning the man's downfall.
Well,
was he? I don't know, but it's all interpretation.
Let me come back on that one, because that's a really fascinating. That leads me to an interesting, I think, an interesting point, because you talked about capacity learning and all of that. It could all be A+, but then you've got to come back to character and things like that. Well, firstly, I want to say that for me, those are capacity issues. if you have no integrity, that for me is a capacity issue. So it's not something in addition. It's not something in parallel. It's just another capacity issue. And the second thing is that because I think that Boris, in his history to date, has demonstrated the most remarkable consistency about that sort of inattention to detail and kind of pleasing himself and kind of trying to get away with it and all of that. I think Rishi Sunak could have registered that domain name on the day that Johnson landed his massive majority in Parliament. He could have, day one, he could have registered ready for Rishi, because it was only a matter of time.
Well, and that brings us, doesn't it, to when we look at the leadership and we look at some of the things that we see out there. Some are saying, they're using dark arts and they're using, the knives start to come out, and the video of Rishi, we were just talking about it earlier, about this fantastic video of him talking in his youth about, I have aristocratic friends, I have middle class friends, I have working class friends, and then going, well, actually, no, I don't have any working class friends. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just an honest recognition of, I said that out loud, and in truth, no, I don't. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's pulled out as being completely disconnected. And you're married to your wife is a multi-millionaire, and etc. And listen, the list goes on, and we could disappear down a rabbit hole on those. But what you do see is that this, I think what it is as we look from the outside in, and we're looking for people to be whiter than white, to be pure of heart, and to have integrity. It's a pretty thankless position. It's a very hard role to take, to be a leader in an organization, to be in a senior role, to be a team leader in a call center. It doesn't matter, because once you espouse, once you hold a standard, once you say that's what good looks like, you are on the hook for being a role model. And I think you're right, or one of us was, in whoever said it a little bit earlier, which is there's a balance between, you've got to have a standard, you've got to have a line, you've also got to have a tolerance. And maybe that's the adult bit, that's the maturity bit. It's like being a parent. You've got to understand what no is, but also at the same time, you've got to have forgiveness. Yeah. You've got to have love. So, and is there a perfect parent? No, there are days when you think, hope social services weren't watching me there, because that was not my finest hour, all the way through to, well done me, I've absolutely nailed it. And that's going to be the same. It's just that when you're in a public domain, every moment of you is captured, and everything you've ever done is forensically investigated.
Absolutely.
And I do sometimes wonder, there are roles where you go, why would you want it? Yeah. It's like, what do you think your life expectancy is, so to speak, in that role? What part of you thinks it's like these reality shows? And if they invited me on one, I'd have to go no. Right, because for me to believe that I'm so charming and so beautiful and so wonderful that 3 months of me on TV, everybody would go, that guy Bloomfell is awesome. No. No, they're going to see me picking my nose. They're going to see me getting a bit short with somebody because I'm irritated, and it's magnified. So there are certain jobs that, the criteria isn't just your intelligence. It's not just your emotional intelligence, not just but there's something about recognizing the enormity of focus that comes on to you.
Oh, I completely agree. But I think that
even good decisions are bent and damaged.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But the thought that's coming to me now is. So we've talked about trust, and we've talked about integrity, and we've talked about credibility, and we've talked about capacity. But I think that most of the candidates at the moment are walking into a major obvious problem, and none of them seems to be willing, except maybe Rishi, to face up to it. And that's this business of tax cuts. You know, the promises that will get you elected, you could be sowing the seeds of the demise of your government. You know, and at the moment, I've been listening in the last 48 hours to whatever declared candidates have been interviewed on the you know, the smart radio programs, and I'm thinking of things like, you know, the various ones on Radio 4. I do take my hat off to the interviewers of the Today program and The World at One and PM and so on. I think that they are very, very smart interviewers, and basically the format in general goes like this: so you're going to promise tax cuts? Yes, yes, yes. You know, we've got to refloat the economy. Okay, where's the money going to come from? And not one of them, in any of the interviews I've listened to, and I've listened to, I'm guessing, certainly 6 or 7, in every single one without exception, there's not been an answer to, so what are you going to cut? Or are you going to borrow? You know, and either way, it's not good economically. But secondly, in the absence of an answer to that question, I'm left with 2 conclusions. One, they haven't thought about what they're going to cut, which for me is incompetent, or they have thought about it and they don't want to declare what it is, which for me is lacking in integrity. Either way, it ain't good. So my feeling is at the moment that all of those leadership candidates at the moment are trying to convince a population which is too smart to believe it, that they can somehow refloat the economy by not borrowing money, not cutting services, but by cutting taxes. Tell me how that works, because I don't think that obeys or even understands the fundamental rules of national economics.
Yeah, and I like that. You know, not thought it through would be, you know, would be painful. Don't want to say would be dishonest, but there's probably don't know. And the dishonesty in that is I'm not prepared to say that actually I don't know if there's an answer to this straight away.
Well, okay, but you know, if they say I don't know where the tax cuts are going to come from, I think there's an almost credible version of that, which is until we look at all the books and can make all the right comparisons at the right time, we can't do that. But you can. But I'd like to hear them say, but you can bet your life we're going to have to save a whole stack of money. There will be cuts. I can't tell you where they're going to come from yet.
Yeah.
But don't make any mistake, they will come.
And I think there's something there. You know, I'm going to reframe your question. You know, it's not that I'm going to make a cut. What I will do is to promise to look at it with a new set of eyes. And then I'll come back to you with what I think we can and can't do. And I may have something that you like to hear and I may have something that you don't like to hear. But it is that need. And I see this in organizations where sometimes the tail is wagging the dog, or people have read certain books or been on certain courses, or they've taken a slant where about placating, about not being willing to give the hard messages. And I think that's the one thing. I look at this when I did some work with some people in the medical profession once, you know, how do you give the difficult messages about maybe something that's happened to somebody? And the answer is quite simple. You just say it. And you say it, you know, with a certain craft and elegance, but you don't wrap it up. You don't tell anybody it'll be all right. Don't worry. You don't do any of that. No. You tell them. No. And the reason that we are trained like that is it is, you know, fully being proven. Most people are adults. They just need data and then they will figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, they may have to seek help. They may be able to do it internally. They may need guidance, but don't worry. Your job is not to not help them make sense of it per se. They will make sense of it for themselves as long as you're giving truth.
Yeah, but you're right. Tough messages have to be delivered directly. That's not brutally, but directly, but unequivocally. And yet a lot of people try to take comfort in the fact that, you know, people, the last thing in the world we must do is remove hope from people. Well, yes, but the other thing you mustn't do is rob them of the ability to put their affairs in order. Although, if you wanted a light-noted heart on which to finish this rather serious set of topics, you talked about the medical profession. A lovely story that used to be told by Professor Sir Michael Drury, who was president of the Royal College of GPs. He said when he was a young doctor in Birmingham, he went to visit an old lady in a rather poor house, and was directed upstairs by a very worried family. And he examined the old lady and came back down again. And the family said, "So, doctor, how is Granny?" He said, "Well, she's not very well, is she?" They said, "No, we know that, doctor. So what's wrong with her?" "Well, I've examined her tummy, and there's a horrible kind of mass in her tummy." And the family said, "Yes, that's what your colleague told us that, doctor." So how ill is she?" "Well, she's really rather gravely ill." "Yes, your colleague told us that, doctor." "And how long has she got?" "Oh, well, it's so hard to say, but I would have thought a matter of weeks, maybe months." "Yes, your colleague told us that, doctor." The family, then eventually Michael Drury said, "So when did my colleague come to see her and give you all these messages?" 25 years ago, doctor."
And that's what it is. So I love that, and it's just given me a moment also to reflect on, and I want to take that story. I think there's something about, you say people say don't take hope away from people. Actually, what you can do is give them the hope that they have in you, and so you don't have to create hope that is fictitious, that ultimately cannot be fulfilled. What I can do is ask you to have a hope in me and the way I will navigate this with you, on behalf of you, whatever that might be. And I think that's what I notice. The individual, the leader, the politician that tries to give hope in the external and then hopes that means that they hope that the hope comes to them by transference. I'll make you these promises and then you can, see that hope in me, instead of, do you know what, I'm not going to make you any promises. But actually that's honest. Therefore, that hope you have in me is more foundationally solid. And I think people fear that generally the population need nice, shiny things to believe in. Yes. Therefore, they don't really believe you're smart enough to believe in me. I've got to offer you something nice and shiny. Well, and I think that's the maturity that I think we want in our leaders. To
cycle back to a point we've made earlier, why would I have faith in you? Well, if I think you know what you're doing, if I think you give a damn, if I think that you're pretty consistent, and if I think you're reasonably courageous to take the tough decisions, so it comes back to the competence, care, consistency, courage. In other words, I will trust you. Yeah. And the hope comes from a realistically appraised trust analysis of this person I'm talking to. Can I trust what they say? And as I say, I think Rishi could have done his Ready for Rishi on the day that majority was announced, at the last general election.
So listen, we'll bring this to a close. The nature of these is not to solve things, but just to have conversations and just to, for us to be curious and just verbalize some of our thoughts, and, that triggers things in ourselves and in others. So on that note, sir, I'll bring us to a close, and we'll prepare for the next one and see. I'm sure there'll be something along in the press in about 24 hours, and then we can pick up and talk about that. So, see you soon,
Take
sir.
Care.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.